The rain wasn't a warning. It was a final breath, a silver-gray hush that fell over the town and choked the light from the sky. The road to Miriam Hart's place at the edge of everything was more mud than road, a slick mess of roots and forgotten stones. Inside the town, folks had pulled their shutters tight, not against the storm, but against her. They'd been hiding from Miriam for 7 long years. She didn't need to make a sound anymore. The wind did her talking for her. Inside her small cottage, a single lamp threw a warm, trembling light against the walls. The kettle was starting to hiss. She sat alone, mending a child's sock, one she hadn't had the heart to throw away. It was a ghost in her hands. Then came the knock. 3 hard raps on the door, not angry, not rushed, just heavy, soaked through with rain and desperation. It was the sound of a man who'd run out of road. Miriam stood up slow. The old ache in her left leg reminded her of the past, an old injury nobody ever talked about. She opened the door, and her breath didn't catch. She didn't flinch, because she'd been waiting for a ghost to come knocking for a long, long time. The man on her porch was a drowned thing. Water dripped from the brim of his hat, from the sleeves of his coat. He was taller than she remembered, but hollowed out, like the world had scooped out everything soft inside him. His eyes weren't asking for pity, they were just empty. And in his arms, wrapped in a dirty patchwork quilt, was a baby. The child was crying, a thin, sharp sound that cut right through the storm. The man looked at her, his face a mask of shame and exhaustion. "He ain't yours," he said, his voice a rough scrape. "But he needs you." Miriam looked from the man to the tiny, squalling thing in his arms. She knew that face, knew the hard set of that jaw. "Elias Boone," she said. It wasn't a question. He just nodded, and the shame on his face got deeper. She stepped aside, but only just. "Not an invitation," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Just enough to get the child out of the rain." The fire crackled a welcome as they stepped inside. She took the baby from him, her hands moving with an instinct she thought she'd buried years ago. The child was warm, too warm. A fever was brewing under that pale skin. Elias stood dripping by the door, afraid to move, as if the floorboards themselves might cast him out. She pointed to the old rocking chair by the fire, the one that had sat empty for 7 winters. He hesitated, then sank into it. "I got no milk," she said flatly. "I brought a goat," he mumbled. "In the back of my wagon. He won't take it from me, just screams." She prepared a bottle, her hands steady, rock steady. But as she lifted the warm milk to the baby's lips, and he latched on with a desperate hunger, something deep inside her broke open. A feeling like the first thaw after a long, cruel winter. The baby drank like he was starved, and Elias let out a breath that sounded a lot like a sob. She didn't ask about the mother, didn't ask where he'd come from. Some stories, you have to let them bleed out on their own time. She poured 2 cups of tea. He didn't touch his. "Came from 3 towns over," he finally said, staring into the fire. "Buried her in Ash Hollow." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with things unsaid. "Not many folks would bring their trouble to my door," Miriam said, her voice low. "Not after what happened. Not after the girl." "I remember," he said. His voice was raw. "But I also remember what you did for my brother's wife. You held her hand when no one else would." "And the sheriff held mine to the fire for it," she shot back. "They punished me for what they feared, a woman with blood on her hands." He didn't argue. He just kept staring at the flames, as if they held the answers. The storm on the roof softened, its anger spent. Miriam started to unwrap the baby's quilt, and that's when she saw it. Stitched into the corner were 2 letters. M.B. Her blood went cold. She stared at the letters, then up at Elias. His face was gray. "She made it while she was waiting," he whispered. "For the baby. She thought it'd be a girl." But Miriam wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at the stitching. It was a special kind of knot, one her own mother had taught her. A knot she had only ever taught to one other person. Her daughter. The baby, full and warm, drifted off to sleep. Miriam stood and carried him to the old cradle in the corner, the one covered with a dusty sheet like a forgotten tomb. She laid him down gently. He didn't stir. "I never thought I'd hear that sound again," she whispered, her voice thick. "What sound?" Elias asked. "The hush," she said, "after a child stops crying." She turned back to the fire, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. She looked at Elias, really looked at him, for the first time. "Why did you really come here, Elias?" He finally met her gaze. His eyes weren't empty anymore. They were filled with a terrible burning grief. "Because I was ashamed," he said. "I believed them. I believed what they all said about you, that you were cursed. I believed it right up until my wife died in my arms. And then, their words didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Now, I only believe in one thing. Anyone who's still standing after the world tries to bury them." And there it was. Not trust, not friendship, just two broken people, standing in the ruins of their lives, with a sleeping child between them. The storm was over. The town would be talking by sunrise. She knew that. But tonight, the baby was safe. Elias didn't ask to stay. She didn't offer. But when he took off his wet coat and hung it by the fire to dry, she didn't stop him. And for the first time in 7 years, Miriam Hart left her door unlocked. Just before dawn, the baby began to cry. A soft, fretful sound. Before Miriam could even move, Elias was there, lifting the child from the cradle, his touch clumsy but gentle. Some families aren't born from love. They're born from need. And sometimes that's a much stronger bond. But as Elias held the baby in the dim firelight, Miriam saw something on the child's neck, just below his ear. A tiny mark, shaped like a fallen star. The exact same birthmark her daughter, Mary Bell, had been born with. And in that moment, she knew. This wasn't just some stranger's child. This was her blood. This was her grandson. And Elias Boone had lied to her from the moment he stepped on her porch. The morning light was a thief, creeping through the window and stealing the shadows from the corners of the room. It found Elias by the sink, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his lies heavy on him. It found Miriam by the fire, her face a mask of stone, spooning oats into a pot. The air between them was tight, ready to snap. When the baby fussed, Miriam was the one who went to him. Her touch was different now, not just knowing, it was possessive. She was claiming what was hers. As she fed the child, she watched Elias over the baby's head. He couldn't meet her eyes. "He screamed every time I tried to feed him," Elias said, breaking the silence. His voice was rough. "Babies feel things they don't understand," she said, her own voice cold and distant. "They know when they're being lied to." The words hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. The baby finished his bottle and drifted back to sleep. Miriam laid him back in the cradle, tucking the blanket with the initials MB tight around him. Then she turned to face Elias. "Tell me again about Ash Hollow," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. He swallowed hard. "The blood, it came too fast. I waited too long to get help." "You didn't send for a midwife," she stated, her eyes drilling into him. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "I was afraid. I didn't want to bring your name into it. Not after what they said about you, what I said about you." He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading. I'm sorry. Sorry for what, Elias? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. For letting your wife die, or for bringing my grandson to my door and pretending he was yours? The color drained from his face. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stared at her, a cornered animal. The blanket, she said, her voice shaking with a rage she hadn't felt in years. The stitching. My mother taught me that knot. I taught my Mary Bell. And that birthmark, that star on his neck. He has her mark, Elias. He finally broke. He sank onto the bench by the hearth, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. The truth, when it finally came, was a torrent of grief and fear. His wife, Maybeth, had died. That part was true, but she'd died of a fever weeks before the baby was born. He'd been traveling, lost, half mad with grief, when he'd found the child. He'd been near Ash Hollow, taking shelter from the coming storm, when he heard the crying. The baby was abandoned, left in a basket at the base of an old oak tree, wrapped in that blanket. He was half frozen and starving. I didn't know what to do, Elias whispered, his voice muffled by his hands. I saw the blanket. I recognized the stitching from a shawl you made for my brother's wife years ago. I knew it had to be yours. I knew you were the only one who would help, but I couldn't just tell you the truth. I thought you'd turn me away. You thought the town would see him as another one of my sins, she finished for him, the bitterness sharp on her tongue. So you made up a story. You gave him a dead mother to make him respectable. He looked up, his face slick with tears. I was trying to protect him. I was trying to save him. You were trying to save yourself, she said, the words like ice. The baby stirred in the cradle, making a soft, snuffling sound. The sound pulled them both back from the brink. Miriam's anger faltered, replaced by a wave of something else, a fierce, primal need to protect the child sleeping in the next room, her daughter's child. She walked over to Elias and stood over him. He flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, she just stood there, her shadow falling over him. Who is his father? She asked, her voice flat. Elias shook his head. I don't know. There was nothing else with him, just the blanket. And a name, scratched into the side of the basket. Miriam's heart stopped. A name? Samuel, he whispered. Samuel, the name her daughter had always said she would give her firstborn son. A fresh wave of grief washed over Miriam, so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Her daughter was gone, truly gone. But a piece of her was here, sleeping in the cradle. A piece of her, named Samuel. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the cottage. It was hard and impatient. Miriam's body went rigid. Elias scrambled to his feet, wiping his face on his sleeve. Standing on the porch was Mrs. Evelyn Pike, the town's self-appointed conscience. Her face was pinched, her eyes like chips of flint. Behind her stood two other women from the church, their faces grim and judgmental. Evelyn Pike's eyes shot from Miriam to Elias, and then landed with a triumphant cruelty on the cradle. So the whispers are true, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Not only have you taken in a strange man, Miriam Hart, but you're trying to play mother again. Have you forgotten how the last time ended? In a coffin. Miriam stepped forward, placing her body between the woman and the cradle. What do you want, Evelyn? We've come to save that child from this house of sin, Evelyn declared. A child born of shame doesn't need to be raised in it. The town council has already been alerted. That baby will be placed with a good Christian family. Elias stepped up beside Miriam, his face pale but his jaw set. You'll do no such thing. Evelyn Pike laughed, a short, ugly sound. "And who are you to stop us? A man with no wife, no name to give his own child. A man who hides behind the skirts of a cursed woman." But then Evelyn's eyes fell on the blanket peeking out from the cradle. Her face went white. She stared at the stitched initials, M.B., and a flicker of something that looked like pure terror crossed her face. She looked at Miriam, then at the baby, and a terrible understanding dawned in her eyes. "Mary Bell," Evelyn whispered, the name like a curse on her lips. She took a stumbling step back, her hand flying to her mouth. And in that moment, Miriam knew with a chilling certainty. Evelyn Pike knew exactly who the baby's father was, and she was terrified. The air on the porch crackled with a tension so thick you could taste it. Evelyn Pike stared at the blanket, at the initials M.B., and the color had completely drained from her face. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, and in a way, she had. The ghost of Mary Bell, Miriam's daughter. "Get off my property, Evelyn," Miriam said, her voice low and trembling, with a rage that had been dormant for 7 years. Evelyn stumbled backward, her two companions looking confused and alarmed. Without another word, she turned and practically fled, her skirts kicking up mud as she hurried back toward town. The other two women scurried after her like frightened hens. The door closed, and the silence in the cottage was deafening. Elias looked at Miriam, his eyes wide with confusion. "What was that? How did she—" "She knows," Miriam whispered, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "She knows who Samuel's father is, and it's someone she wants to protect." The story of the girl, the one the town only whispered about, was suddenly screaming in her mind. Mary Bell hadn't just gotten sick. She'd been with someone, a secret love. Miriam had suspected, but her daughter had been so private, so afraid. Now it all started to make a horrifying kind of sense. Evelyn Pike's cruelty wasn't just about town gossip. It was personal. It was a cover-up. "Who?" Elias asked. "Who would she protect?" "Her son," Miriam said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "Thomas Pike. He and Mary Bell. They were close once, before he went away to the city, before he came back, all full of himself and his family's money." The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so ugly it made her sick. Thomas Pike had gotten her daughter pregnant. He, or his mother, had forced her to keep it a secret. And when she died, they had covered their tracks. They had let the town blame Miriam, the midwife, the woman who lived on the edge of their respectable world. It was the perfect crime. "They left her to die," Miriam said, her voice breaking. "And they left her baby to die." A new kind of fire ignited in her eyes. This wasn't just about grief anymore. This was about justice. That afternoon, a rock shattered their front window. It landed inches from the cradle where Samuel was sleeping. The baby woke up screaming. Elias lunged for the door, his face a mask of fury. But Miriam grabbed his arm. "No!" she cried. "Don't you see? This is what they want. They want us to be angry. They want to paint us as violent, as unfit. They're building a case against us." He stopped, his whole body trembling. She was right. Evelyn Pike wasn't just going to run and hide. She was going to fight. She was going to use the town, the law, everything she could to bury her secret and take Samuel away from them forever. They boarded up the window. They didn't speak. The house felt like a trap, the walls closing in. That evening, as Miriam sat staring into the fire, holding Samuel tight against her chest, Elias came and knelt beside her. "This is my fault," he said, his voice thick with guilt. "My lie brought this down on you." "Your lie brought my grandson home," she corrected him, her voice soft but fierce. "You made a mistake, Elias. But you didn't abandon a child in the woods. You saved him. Now we have to save him again." He looked at her, his eyes full of a new kind of respect. What do we do? We fight, she said, but not with fists, with the truth. She went to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room, one she hadn't opened in 7 years. The hinges creaked in protest. Inside, beneath folded linens and dried herbs, was a small leather-bound journal. Mary Bell's journal. Miriam's hands trembled as she opened it. She had never been able to bring herself to read it after her daughter died. It was too painful. But now, it might be the only weapon they had. She read late into the night, by the flickering light of a single candle. Elias sat across from her, watching, waiting. The pages were filled with a young girl's hopes and dreams, her fears, her poetry, and her love for Thomas Pike. It was all there. The secret meetings, the promises he made. And then, the last entry. It was dated the day before she died. Her handwriting was shaky, weak. He won't help me. His mother found out. She called me a disgrace. She said this baby would ruin them. She gave me a tea. A special tea, she said, to make me strong. But I feel so weak, so cold. I'm afraid. If anything happens to me, look for the locket, the one he gave me. It's my only proof. Miriam's blood ran cold. A tea. Evelyn Pike had given her daughter a tea. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a difficult birth. It was murder. Miriam slammed the journal shut, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias was at her side in an instant. What is it? What did you find? She poisoned her, Miriam whispered, the words barely audible. Evelyn Pike poisoned my daughter to protect her family's name. Suddenly the door burst open. Sheriff Dake stood on the threshold, his face grim. Behind him were 2 deputies. And behind them, standing in the cold night air with a triumphant smirk on her face, was Evelyn Pike. Miriam Hart, the sheriff said, his voice heavy with regret. By order of the town council, I'm here to take custody of the child. He's being placed in the care of Mrs. Pike until a judge can arrive. Evelyn's smirk widened. She had won, or so she thought. Miriam stood up, clutching the journal to her chest like a shield. She looked past the sheriff, past the deputies, and straight into the eyes of the woman who had murdered her daughter. You'll take this child over my dead body, Miriam said, her voice ringing with the clarity of absolute certainty. And you'll answer for what you did to his mother. The sheriff and his deputies were stone-faced, just following orders. But Elias, he moved. He stepped right in front of Miriam, his body a solid wall between her and the law. You're not taking him, Elias said, his voice a low growl. Stand down, Boone, Sheriff Dake warned, his hand moving toward the pistol at his hip. Don't make this worse than it has to be. Evelyn Pike sniffed, a picture of false piety. Sheriff, you see, they're unstable, unfit. The child isn't safe here. But Miriam wasn't looking at the sheriff. She was looking at Evelyn. You gave her a tea, didn't you, Evelyn? A special tea to make her strong. Foxglove, was it? Or nightshade? A flicker of panic in Evelyn's eyes. She recovered quickly. I have no idea what this madwoman is talking about. She's grieving. She's lost her mind. My daughter wrote it all down, Miriam said, holding up the journal. The day before she died, she wrote about you, about your son, Thomas, about the baby you wanted to disappear. Sheriff Dake looked from Miriam to Evelyn, a seed of doubt planted in his eyes. He'd known Miriam his whole life. He knew she wasn't a liar, and he knew Evelyn Pike was capable of almost anything to protect her family's reputation. This is nonsense, Evelyn snapped. Where is your proof? The ramblings of a dead girl. She mentioned a locket, Miriam said, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. A locket your son gave her. She said it was her proof. The sheriff's face went pale. He took an involuntary step back, his hand dropping from his gun. His eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape. He looked haunted. "A locket," Dake whispered, his voice hoarse. "What about it, Sheriff?" Miriam pressed, sensing a crack in his armor. "Did you find a locket when you found my daughter's body?" The silence stretched. Everyone was looking at the sheriff now. His face was slick with sweat. He wouldn't meet Miriam's eyes. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. I don't recall," he stammered. "Liar!" Elias roared. The word echoed in the small cottage. Dake flinched as if he'd been struck. And in that moment, everyone knew. He was lying. He had found the locket, and he had hidden it. For 7 years, he had carried the secret of Mary Bell's death, protecting the son of the most powerful woman in town. "Sheriff," Evelyn said, her voice sharp, a clear warning. "Do your duty." But the spell was broken. Dake looked at Evelyn, and for the first time, there was no fear in his eyes. Only a deep, burning shame. He looked at Miriam, at the pain etched on her face. He looked at the cradle, where the child of this terrible secret was now beginning to stir and cry. He took a deep breath. "Evelyn," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "The charade is over." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. His hand trembled as he pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket, shaped like a heart. He held it out on the palm of his hand. It swung gently on its broken chain. Evelyn Pike let out a strangled gasp. It was a sound of pure horror. "I found it in her hand," the sheriff said, his voice thick with guilt. "She was clutching it so tight. I had to pry her fingers open. I should have told the truth then. But I was a coward. I let you bully me. I let this whole town bully her." He looked at Miriam. "I'm sorry, Miriam. I'm so sorry." Evelyn Pike lunged for the locket, her face a twisted mask of rage and desperation. "Give that to me! It's mine!" But Elias was faster. He blocked her, pushing her back. The 2 deputies, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust, moved to restrain her. She fought like a wild animal, screaming curses, her pious mask shattered, revealing the monster underneath. Miriam walked over to the sheriff and took the locket from his hand. She opened it. Inside were 2 tiny, faded portraits, one of her daughter, Mary Bell, smiling and full of life, and the other of a handsome, arrogant-looking young man, Thomas Pike. The truth was finally out, not in whispers, but in a scream. The town council meeting wasn't a meeting. It was a reckoning. It was held in the church, of all places. The pews were packed. The entire town was there, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity, shame, and disbelief. Evelyn Pike was there, seated at the front, flanked by her husband and her son, Thomas, who had been brought back from the city. He looked pale and weak, a shadow of the swaggering boy Mary Bell had fallen in love with. Miriam and Elias sat on the other side, with Samuel sleeping peacefully in a basket between them. Sheriff Dake stood at the pulpit, the silver locket in his hand. He told them everything. He told them about finding Mary Bell's body, about the locket clutched in her hand. He told them how Evelyn Pike had pressured him, threatened him, to hide the evidence and rule the death an accident. He confessed his own cowardice, his voice breaking as he looked at Miriam and asked for her forgiveness. Then he opened the journal. He read Mary Bell's last entry aloud. The words echoed in the silent church, a voice from the grave accusing her killer. When he read about the tea Evelyn had given her, a collective gasp went through the crowd. People turned to stare at Evelyn, their eyes now filled with horror and accusation. Evelyn sat rigid, her face like stone. But her son, Thomas, he broke. He started to sob, great, gulping breaths. He stood up, shaking, and pointed a trembling finger at his mother. "She did it," he cried. I loved Mary Bell. I wanted to marry her. But my mother, She said it would be a disgrace. She said she would handle it. She told me she was just going to give her money to go away. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she would hurt her. The confession hung in the air, sealing his mother's fate. Evelyn Pike didn't scream. She didn't deny it. She just sat there as the deputies came for her face a mask of cold, unrepentant fury. The righteous queen of the town had fallen. The matter of Samuel's custody was settled without a word. No one dared to question Miriam's right to raise her own grandson. The guardianship papers were signed, sealed, and delivered before the sun went down. As they walked out of the church, the townspeople parted for them. They didn't offer apologies. Their shame was too deep for words. But they looked at Miriam with a new respect. Awe, even. The woman they had cast out had become their conscience. Back at the cottage, the broken window let in the cool evening air. The fire burned bright. Elias was fixing the frame, his movements slow and deliberate. Miriam was rocking Samuel, humming a lullaby that Mary Bell had loved. The silence between them was different now. It was comfortable, easy. The storm had passed, and they were the only two left standing in the calm. "You don't have to stay, you know," Miriam said softly, not looking at him. "Your part in this is done. You're free to go." Elias stopped his work. He turned and looked at her, at the way the firelight caught the silver in her hair. He looked at the baby in her arms. "I know," he said, "but I've been running for a long time. I think I've finally found a place to stop." He walked over and knelt in front of her chair. He reached out and gently touched Samuel's cheek. The baby smiled in his sleep. "He needs a father," Elias said, his voice quiet. "And I need a reason to be a better man." Miriam looked at him, and for the first time, a real smile touched her lips. It was a small thing, but it lit up the whole room. "I think," she said, "that you already are." They never did get married, not in the eyes of the law. They didn't need a piece of paper to tell them they were a family. They had built one out of secrets and sorrow, out of courage and truth. The town changed after that. The whispers stopped. People started leaving things on Miriam's porch: a basket of bread, a jar of preserves, a newly knitted blanket for the baby. They were small offerings, silent apologies. One day, Elias finished fixing the porch steps. He found Miriam in the garden, planting new herbs. Samuel was playing at her feet, laughing as he tried to catch a butterfly. Elias came and stood beside her, and they watched the boy together. "He has your daughter's smile," Elias said. "He has your strength," Miriam replied. "Some stories don't end. They just begin again." A man knocks on a door in the rain, holding a secret. A woman opens it, holding a memory. And together, they find that the only thing stronger than a town's judgment is a love that refuses to be buried. They learn that justice isn't always found in a courtroom. Sometimes it's found in the quiet hush after a child stops crying, in a house where the door is finally, always, left unlocked. The people you're meant to save are often the ones who end up saving you. Not with grand gestures, but with the simple, quiet decision to stay when the rest of the world has told you to run. If you've ever felt like an outcast, like the world has already written your story, remember Miriam and Elias. Remember that the truth is always worth fighting for, and that a new beginning can be waiting right on the other side of your darkest storm. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think justice really looks like. Thanks for listening.